Hello, David.
Hello.
First of all, I would like to say thank you for talking to us.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm happy to do it. I love Yossi and I really appreciate the work. Um, it's incredibly important. When I found Ilanote project before I ever met Yossi, I thought, well, why isn't this huge? Why haven't I been told about this? And I was actually upset about it. It's like this has been there the whole time and I didn't know. So for me, it's, you know, tremendously important to made this connection. So very appreciative of it. So glad to be here. Very happy about it.
I would also like to say that I listened to uh, the whole discussion you had with Yossi, and it was very interesting. Actually, if it was, I can recommend not to edit out anything. It was a pleasure to watch the two of you explore together in the conversation, and it was very interesting. Um, What I would like to ask is regarding actually what you just said, maybe it is connected to what you just mentioned. And what what is the meaning of the Ilanot for you? I mean, of course, it can be treated as a diagram or a kind of an art, but maybe it has an extra kind of meaning in the whole system it appears in and how it touches the human mind. And I would really like to hear your point of view regarding.
Mm. Well, I occupy a very strange position in the scheme of things because, on the one hand, I'm outside of the world of religion, but on the other hand, I'm outside of the secular world too. So, being neither religious nor secular,
Mhm.
I can't say that Ilanote for me are manuals of how to, meaning instructions for direct practice, because they're not. They're artifacts of a process beyond the discussion graphically. They're comments on something that neither the graphic language nor conventional linguistics can touch. They're something that's unrepresentable. But on the other hand, they are not art either. So if art, in the sense that we can use the term colloquially, is part of the secular world and the direct instruction would be part of the religious world, I would say that I am neither one. That my explorations, there's not really much of a name for it. So when I view Ilanote historically, I view it through the lens of this odd position that I occupy. So I don't look at it as a scholar. I don't look at it as a religious practitioner, particularly when we're talking about the idiosyncrasies of the Lurianic system. Sometimes I get a lot of direct relevance to my practice from some pre Lurianic representations, certainly those that relate to anything in the 13th century or even the work of the Ramak is a little bit more directly relevant to what I do than technical Lurianic Kabbalah would be most of the time. But then again, I interpret it in such a strange way that if I had a conversation with somebody who was really immersed in those systems idiomatically, we wouldn't be able to like talk to each other much about that. So, occupying this position that I have, I look at Ilanote, and I assume you're talking about how I relate to the tradition itself. I assume that's your question. And the you want to amplify that a little bit?
I'm mostly relating to how does it touch you? How do you see it?
I see it magically. I see it as an alternate universe of possibilities. There's the conventional general relative reality that human beings share, where we could look at the sky and then look at the earth and look at the stars and all agree that we see them. And that's generally accepted. And we could say sky, earth, a tree, a bird. But that's broad strokes. Once you get into the nuances of specific individual interpretations of perception, the general language of reality doesn't work anymore. So you have to come up with equivalent languages that are cued by symbols. And who can possibly follow a symbolic language that they're not in already? For example, if you're practicing with my material and you're really deep in it, you'll know what I'm talking about, but nobody else will,
Mhm.
right? And I assume that about Ilanote as well, that I'm looking at a series of symbolic languages that I don't live in. I mean, I know the Sphirot, like yeah, that's the general aspect of it. Everybody knows the Sphirot, but what do they really mean, right? I don't know. The only life that you could participate in and live inside would be the life that people practicing that particular lineage in that particular style with those particular sources are intimate with. So, excuse me for saying so, but I don't expect any scholar or academic to do that. You know, it's a living thing that is meant to be lived through with the textures that have built through and accumulated through experience in the system. So that when, for example, Sphirot are used, not all Sphirot are created equal,
Mhm.
you know? So, so how do you get in? Well, since I'm not in when I look at the tradition, I have my own totally idiosyncratic, totally separate individual interpretation of these things. And I made up my mind a long time ago. Um, by all means, by any means necessary. You know, like I got to do what I got to do. So if I've got to change the meaning of things to suit the work that I do, I don't have any compunction about making up my own rules because, you know, first of all, who's going to stop me? And second of all, the people who would object are doing the same thing within their systems. And everybody has to make a choice at some point. How do you want to work? So I've got this little territory that I work through, and I view everything else through, and I don't have a pretense to being objective. And because I am relieved of that burden, I can be as weird as I want with it. And that's something that comes very natural to me, being sort of my own boss of, you know, the rules. When I studied with other people and had to play by their rules, you know, I had to do a good job, be respectful, and learn from people who had rules. They all had rules. I never felt like I was home anywhere. You know, my home doesn't have a home. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and thank you. And I would also like to add another small question, if possible, please. When you
Yeah.
say it refers to magic, to things that are not the skies and the trees and the atoms and all that we know, can you maybe, if it's possible, to even reflect about it or say another word about what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, most of the people who buy my books and talk to me most of them, or I should say a good deal of them, are practical occultists and ceremonial magicians. And a good amount of them work out of the grimoire tradition. And this is almost 100% non-Jewish use of Kabbalistic symbol system to support the process of manipulating phenomena. And the great majority of people who work this way have very different intentions than I do. And practical magicians are basically trying to, cheat the system. They're trying to manipulate phenomena to do whatever they want to do, whatever that is, right? Usually having to do with the manipulation of entities, spirit intelligences, of various kinds that occupy a certain stratum of what we would call the lower astral region. And if you're lucky, they have a little bit more refined sensibilities and maybe are using angels. I don't do any of that, but I come from that. I did that as a young man. So I understand that world. So I'm talking to these people, and I'm trying to interest them in another set of priorities. So when I use the term magic, I'm talking about many things depending on interpretation, from practical nuts and bolts magic of Solomonic texts and grimoires, and even like sort of magic that is performed ritually within the context of magical orders, in the style of the Golden Dawn or the Thelemic system or something like that, which I know very well. I mean, those people contact me every day. But when I use the term magic in my own work, I'm talking about the quality of phenomena that is alive. That's it.
Mm.
If phenomena is alive, it is the place where what perceives and what is perceived merge their boundaries and lose those boundaries. And in that immersion into that living, vital lucidity, that lucid quality of livingness, one realizes a nature of things that is completely hidden by the conventional reactions to phenomena, right? The very solid, very separate, very fragmentary, largely chaotic epistemological and ontological assumptions that are made by smart people. You're talking about smart people who just see the world in what I consider to be a rather rigid way. So when I talk about magic in the more general sense, I'm talking about the alleviation of that rigidity. And that's what I try to interest the technical magicians in. Because in the world of technical magic, you're talking about people with a lot of different agendas, but they all kind of converge in a common language. Some of them are functional people who are trying to develop a spiritual life. Some of them are just trying to manipulate phenomena to get what they can get. Some of them are mentally ill, and I have to deal with a lot of mentally ill people.
Mm.
I've had to deal with mentally ill people with my work since the very beginning. And the issue of magic always comes up with them, because once you open up that box, they all crawl out. What's out there would terrify most people if they knew. And this is a hiding place for people. So really what I try to do, my job, is to bring that to what I consider to be sanity of some kind, which is clear and inherently beneficial. right? And I hate to use the word because of how it's going to be interpreted, but something that is essentially good. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean it in the Platonic sense, right? Like, sure, we could be concerned with the shadows on the wall of the cave and have a life with that. But what's the truth? What is true, good, and beautiful in Plato's sense? Well, that's what I'm concerned with. That's the rest of my life is disposable. That's what it's about. So if you can interest people, luckily, I have that little audience that listens to me that is concerned with whatever they're doing. And I have to be a part of it because they ask me questions about it. And I come from that. So I have some insight into it because that's how I started. You know, it's funny that most of the people who would view Ilanote are coming either from the religious world or the academic world, I assume. Well, there's this other community of people who would absolutely love it, you know, and they don't know about it, you know. So I'm sort of like a bridge for these various communities, you know. And one thing that I've always had going for me, it's like a a gift. It's like a superpower. It's like something that I received. It's like I have this background between the Jewish world and the world of Hermetic occultism. And the reason why that's so great is because those two communities barely know about each other. They don't touch anywhere. I never understood this. Why do the occultists, why don't they get curious about Hebrew Kabbalah? And why don't the Jews get curious about the occultists more? Why aren't they more integrated? I never understood why they were so separate and ghettoized, you know. They only function in their little areas. So a guy like me comes along with a background in both. They're like, where'd that come from? So you ask about magic. That's sort of like the invitation for these communities to find out about each other. You know, being such a general term and being such a way to, you know, I think that the short answer to what you're asking me about magic is the statement that I really truly believe and try to live out, that I believe there's no such thing as ordinary phenomena. It's all miraculous, down to, you know, the pebbles on the street that you walk on and the air that you breathe. So certainly when you hold that kind of view of phenomena, um, living things are symbols and symbols are living things, right? And if that's the case, then what's in the Ilanote, that's alive. That's not some sort of information. It's not dead information. It's a living presence inviting you into a deeper communion with it. So to me, that's thoroughly and totally magical. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a beginning, I think. It's a start.
Ask away, let her rip.
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Anybody can ask anything.
So
I'm not shy.
hi. I was wondering if you how to treat your work. Is it a tool for your audience? Something they should is there something they shouldn't do while looking at it or checking inquiring it? I mean, or is it a meditation invite to meditate through it? Or
Like,
I was just
what's your
wondering how to
user's
use
guide?
this tool.
User
Yes,
guide.
user guide.
Well, I guess the best answer would be that I don't know.
Mm.
But I could guess, and my guess would be that it's a sample. It's an example of something that could be emulated by those who share similar concerns. So I do the work, and what's left over are images and writings. And once I'm done with it, the world can have it. And what they do with it is up to them. So it's sort of built into the system that it's not going to be a user's guide. It's not going to reproduce what happened to me. That's not possible. But it could be a good set of guiding instructions if you see it that way. It could be that kind of tool that you're asking me about. I wouldn't want to make something that was idiomatically reproducible, where I would set out to provide a series of instructions where I say, you follow these steps, you end up like me. I really wouldn't wish that on anybody. So the thing about it is that I am not claiming any kind of definitive realization, you know, like religion offers to people, or like a guru offers to people, where the guru has the definitive realization and then gives instructions that you follow idiomatically to become like them, or to at least attach to them. Nothing of the kind with my work. I view myself as a, you know, I always think about some of the early explorers that explored parts of the world that nobody had ever gone to before, like some of the British ships that tried to get to Antarctica. And in the process of trying to get to Antarctica, they drew these maps, these like wildly inaccurate maps. Like if someday somebody else wanted to go to Antarctica, what would they have? They would have these maps. Unfortunately, some of these people, they died there, and I don't know the history very much, but I think about it in the abstract a lot. It's like, I'm going to make these maps, and then I'm going to die there, and then leave these weird maps, and others will make of them what they will, or improve them, or make them more accurate or suitable to them. And whatever they do is kind of out of my hands at that point. I don't view my own manufacture of these artifacts, the writings and drawings, I don't view that as having any choice in the matter. I haven't chosen to do this. I can't do anything else, certainly not at this point. You know, it's like, I think very often about other life forms like animals and how they operate in species behavior. There's a certain amount of volition that, for example, a dog has, where you put out two piles of food, it'll choose which one it likes. It'll eat this type of food and not that type of food. So that's a choice. It's like limited free will within the parameters of the species behavior. I think I have a limited amount of free will within my species behavior, but it's a pretty tight margin. You know, I'm not interested in a lot of things. I don't have a lot of range. You know, I just do the job. You know, I don't try to make a big deal about it, or I used to sort of have a very grandiose operatic view of it. But I don't live in an opera by Puccini. I live in like a fairly boring life where I just get to work every morning. I just sit in a room and write and draw. So I guess the most grandiose thing I could say is that I'm not only offering the artifacts to people, but I'm offering the possibility that there could be a life like this, which most people never heard of. Most people that I talk to have never heard of somebody living like this or behaving like this. Even in communities of practitioners, people haven't heard of it. Because I've lived in different communities of practitioners where everybody has devoted their life to practice only. And nobody there is sort of a cartographic explorer. I never met another one. I mean, I just haven't. I never heard about anybody else doing it. So I offer to people the example, for better or worse, of this as a way to live your life, beyond the artifacts that are produced by it. Like, one can do this for no worldly reason. There's no reason. There's no logic. There's no reasonable way to try to tell somebody that this is a good way to live. It's just from the standards of the world. It's, purposeless and a little nuts. So having what I view as really no choice, I can't really say what people will make of my work or what it's for. I mean, for me, it's just for deeper immersion into my concerns, which has to do with the essential nature of phenomena. So I guess if I would try to explain it, and I see behind you a classroom, so I'm talking to an academic context of some sort, and in the language that seems suitable for that, I would say I'm an experimental phenomenologist. And I just map out my research. It's not entirely wrong, but then again, I wouldn't want to be misinterpreted as that being philosophy, because I don't think I have anything to do with philosophy. I have just as much of an argument with Heidegger as I do with Maimonides. So I'm not part of either of those two worlds. But I hope that answers your question somewhat.
It does.
Anybody else? I don't want to interject. Or you can keep thinking.
We've got a question down front from the fellow.
Yeah. All your work are black. All your work are black and white?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because I can do it. Because I know how to make images that I've never seen before in that way. And everything about my visual work that was chosen as to create the vocabulary was chosen out of necessity, out of function, down to the type of mechanical pencils that I use, the type of pens, the type of paper, and things like black and white tonality as the visual vocabulary, because I know how to make something I never saw before. When I was a young man, I worked with color before I started to make this type of mapping. And I stopped for 10 years. I stopped making visual art for 10 years. And part of the reason that I stopped and had to reassess everything is because I wasn't doing one single thing that wasn't referential to something that somebody else did, and I wasn't adding anything or exploring anything. And my understanding of color is that way. It's not a unique understanding of color. It's not that color couldn't be used cartographically, making the kinds of things that I make. I'm sure that it could, but I'm not the guy to do it. I just don't have that gift of it. And this all came to a head in about 2005 when I went to San Marco in Florence and saw the Fra Angelico frescoes. In San Marco, before you get to the monks' chambers where the frescoes in the cells are upstairs, there's this little anteroom downstairs where there are small altarpieces that are glazed paintings. They're oil over tempera, I assume. I don't even really know. And Fra Angelico's color was not the color of somebody making a product. It was exploratory. He was mapping spiritual realms with color. And this was before I even started making drawings again. And I remember thinking, holy crap, this is like, I could never do that. I don't have that in me. I always knew I had something in me, but it's not that, you know. So as a young man, when I made black and white drawings, I knew something could come out of this that's different, that's totally discoverable, like I could discover something new. But I never felt that way about color because you gotta pick your battles. You know, you gotta know what you have, what you really have, what the gift is that you have, which means that these other things that maybe you wish you had, maybe you don't have those things. You got to be realistic about it. And one day you got to say, all right, I'm going to do what I know I can do. And I'm going to leave this other stuff alone because I could waste a whole lot of time trying to be the kind of colorist that I will never be. And Fra Angelico was the turning point for me. It's like, I look at that, I think that guy's something, he's got something I don't have. And I feel that way about many of the truly great colorists. I also feel that about other aspects in visual art that I don't have. For example, figuration. I can't be a figurative artist like William Blake. I look at what William Blake does with figures and I think, that's for him. I can't even aspire to that, nor would I want to. I don't want to break into somebody else's territory. I want to find my own territory. So this is the long list of things that I can't do. In life, it's a very long list. I can't use color. I can't draw figures. I can't make money. I can't do a lot of things. So you got to be realistic. What's that?
But you can try.
Well, what I decided was I'm going to try to do what I feel intuitively will work. So I'm concentrating my efforts into specialization. But when it comes to trying to do things where you end up being Don Quixote, it's like, I'm not going to waste. I only got, like, at this point, I really don't have a lot of time left in life. So I got to make good use of the time I have before I'm a demented old dude who can't do anything. So
I have to say, I'm a little surprised by this answer because my impression, my intuitive sense of the work was that your choice of monochrome expression was principled somehow, not the so maybe the accidental result of any limitations that you might have as the creator of the work, but that somehow I wouldn't be able to be certain about what the principle would be, but I can imagine, for example, that it might prevent people from falsely projecting some kind of, reified referent in the work, because color seems more real. So if you make biomorphic images in color, people are going to think that that's a realm that you visited, and now you're making a landscape image of an internal realm that you have reified by using color to represent it. So I thought that you were somehow for spiritual, philosophical, whatever you want to call them, reasons, or ideological reasons, theological reasons, mystical reasons, that the black and white was a choice, that it was a strong choice, and not the default of what remains after you take away what you don't, what other people do and what you don't do well.
Well, what you're saying is absolutely correct, but I had to discover that, through working. That wasn't something I started out with. I had to find out the hard way that implication of the work was there. How would I have known unless I had made images and then thought about them and thought, well, yes, they do read that way. Because now they exist and I can look at them and I could come up with that implication. Plus, the other thing that we're not mentioning is there's this very long and wonderful tradition of monochrome images in Western esoterica that I've been fascinated with my entire life. The majority of 17th century esoteric images, mostly coming out of the alchemical tradition, was typified by the great studio of Marian and de Bry. Then there's the work of various theorists who either had the work executed by like a Marian and de Bry studio or some other studio, like, for example, the work of Dionysius Freiherr, the work of Robert Flood, and any of those guys. When you look at how engravings were treated before the discovery of photography, there was an imaginative exploratory tradition of black and white engravings that goes back hundreds of years that I was privy to growing up, and nobody ever talked about it. My attempts to go to school, which ended very badly, involved taking some art history classes and asking questions. And nobody ever told me about this stuff. So when I stumbled upon it, I'm like, what the hell is wrong with this world that I make the effort to go to school and nobody tells me about the one thing that I really can use and want to find? Like, it was so out of fashion in the 70s and 80s to talk about this in a university that it's almost like I was doing something wrong by even bringing it up, because it was my attempts at education. I intersected the university world at a highly ideological time. So nobody wanted to have these conversations with me, but it was there. I mean, I found out about this stuff through books. There was no internet. And once I found out about it, I had to find out about it through people who were publishing it, guys like Adam McLean, and Jocelyn Godwin,
Sure.
and people like that. There was no Ilanote project to hand it to me. I mean, these kids today, they act like, like it's no big deal. It is a big deal. Because I straddle the time when you had to work your ass off to find this stuff. So maybe that gave me a heightened appreciation of the preciousness of it. But yeah, so there is a kind of an ethos and a purpose behind monochrome images, that they occupy a rarefied space of the mind where naturalistic features like color are not invited. And it's almost like you have to go through a special door to get there. And that door is exclusionary in the sense that certain features of the naturalistic world will not help you through. And I think that even people who used color had similar ideas about what they were doing. William Blake talked about this all the time, that in order to get to his world, you had to leave naturalistic appearances behind as well. So why not do that with the issue of color? It does it in a different way. It's a sensibility. It's not a set of rules. It's a sensibility. So if you have that sensibility, you make your choices and then you go into your realms and explore them, no matter what they are. But in my case, I felt very liberated to no longer carry the burden of color with me.
If you've already said that much, can you add something about the way you think about two versus three-dimensional modes of representation in esoteric cartography? I know people a lot of times ask me, aren't there any ilanot that are three-dimensional? Why do we only have these two-dimensional drawings? What are we supposed to make of that? What would even think of a notion of a divine structure that is represented in two dimensions, if you can even call it a representation? But I mean, I know, I mean, in your work, you have both. You have images that are, largely drawn from the repertoire of tradition that are typically two-dimensional. Sometimes you seem to offer them in a suggestion of three-dimensionality, and then you have the biomorphic aspects of the images that are, that are readable as three-dimensional representations. Do those carry any kind of meaning for you? Is that also a choice? Does it mean that you're doing a different kind of work when you figure, Ein Sof, is a circle rather than a sphere? Or I'm not as the circle, but you could just make it a simple question. What's the difference in your mind between seeing a circle and seeing a sphere on a piece of photography?
It's a very profound question with multiple layers of an answer. And let's start by saying that the area that I explore where I get the most sort of meat off the bone is in this twilight overlapping territory between form and formlessness. And the way that you could represent formlessness, you can't represent formlessness, but the way you can approach it graphically is with pure geometry, which people read as two-dimensional. It's actually not two-dimensional. It's a set of two-dimensional symbols for non-dimensional realities. So you can't represent it, so you have an equivalent system where you use these stripped-down, pure, idealized forms as symbols. Okay, so that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is visionary activity. Visionary activity has to be real enough that you could relate to it and understand it and have the fullness of experience with it. So devices like shading and volume, the representation of three-dimensionality as volume, become really useful tools because it invites the vision to come alive more. So what I do is really neither of those two things. There's a point where they overlap. And in that overlapping point, you have spaces that seem just real enough that you could relate to them, but they're impossible spaces. And the way that you can understand this in my pictures is that I might represent a space that seems to have, for example, a three-dimensional space that you can occupy with your mind, and maybe a horizon line, and maybe an expanse, and maybe something that seems close and things that seem far away. But if you tried to build it, you couldn't do it, you know, and the space kind of obstructs itself. It's an impossible space. It's a space that can only exist through the imaginal facility, right? And this is really nothing new, because one branch of image making that I've always been obsessed with was painting from central Italy before 1450, before the Renaissance made idiomatic perspective sort of the standard for everybody. So what you have were painters like Giovanni de Paolo and Sassetta and Lorenzetti, and they made spaces of the imagination. And to a certain extent, you could say the same thing about Giotto, that you couldn't build a Giotto. It's impossible. There's too much flat against volume that flips back and forth. What I found was, like I said before, I had to find this out the hard way by exploring these spaces, right? And once I started exploring these spaces and mapping them out and found this overlapping territory, I realized that I've always lived there. I've always been there. Just like at a certain phase of my own practice, I realized permanently that I am neither awake nor asleep. So there's this point where, you know thyself, right? This is where I live. This is the country I come from. You know, my national identity, like the country that I come from, is the place where it's neither three-dimensional nor two-dimensional. And that's real to me. That's realism to me. That's reality to me. It's not like I look at the room that I'm sitting in and see it that way. It's not like that at all. But I don't live like that anyway by sensory impulses. I live far more through an imaginative lens. So to me, it is that way. It doesn't look that way. It is that way. And it's just a matter of being truthful, you know. Like, I think the main job I have with making these images right is to not lie to people, to not try to represent things that I'm not, or to try to, overreach or go into areas where I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just sticking with what I know. So in that sense, I've always been fine with being a kind of a primitive, I'm just trying to do the job, and in my little world, it's a weird world where if I show you a space that looks like you could enter into it, the little voice is telling the viewer, come into the space, come into the space. But then you have a series of compositional elements that say, nope, you can't come into the space. You have to confront something. So you're going to have to stop somewhere. It's not like come into the space and have an easy time. You can have a mental vacation in the space and just release. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And those tensions and conflicts in the composition are part of what I found there. That's actually part of the meaning. So the spatial logic that seems to put you in impossibility is part of the meaning, is part of the content. It's not just merely a device to present information. These spaces are the information. They are the meaning.
Can you say something about what I perceive as a kind of contradiction between the complexity of the images that you make and the simplicity of your fundamental insight.
Wow. Can you amplify that a little?
I mean, I'm not sure how well I can, but it's like when I think about, you talked about your typical students and your way of kind of pushing back gently against their engagement with their spirits and angels and okay, and you, I know, not from this conversation, but others with you of your interest in Dzogchen and just your fundamental insistence that what you're interested in is the the clear, simple ground of that you maybe holds all of this complexity, but but you always are warning against the reification of theological constructs and whatever your one's visionary experiences might be, religious experiences might be, that it can all be stripped down to a very simple insight or even insistence that we direct our awareness to the extent possible to the, I don't know, to the substratum, to the ground of being, and not to all of the epiphenomenal manifestations that typically command our attention. And if whatever they may be, from the temperature in the room and the pictures on the walls to our God concept. So there's something like very clear and straightforward about your teaching that I feel like it's a very strong message that you have. Don't get distracted. Don't reify. Go deeper, deeper, deeper till it's clear. And that's and ironically, maybe or not, your images are often extremely baroque and dense and thickets of text and shapes.
Yeah, that's an excellent question with two answers. Really good question. First of all, I really like the word epiphenomenal. That's a really good word. I got to remember that. So there's two answers. The first answer is the big one. Reality is like that. It's a paradox. The nature of phenomena is infinite, but it displays itself as finite form. So what choice do I have but to represent that paradox as a simplicity that presents itself as complexity? I mean, it's just it. It's just what it is. That's the job, right? So the way that I would bring it back to you specifically is this is the primordial symptom, right? It appears contained, but its nature is uncontainable. I mean, what else are we doing, right? So that paradox where containment complexity and uncontainable simplicity occupy the same space by nature and won't resolve themselves through logic. And yet at the same time, there is no contradiction. There is no jumping from one to the other. They are literally the same thing. And we have to struggle with that paradox, that's the work. It's not that infinite simplicity became seemingly contained complexity. I don't believe that it did, because I don't believe that there was a creation or a mechanical process. I think that what I call, where'd he go?
I'm sorry, somebody broke through all my defense mechanisms and called me on the computer, so I
Oh,
had
okay.
to shut them down.
All right. So the answer to your question is I don't believe that one became the other or there's a mechanical exchange between the two. I think there's what I call a lightning flash of realization of their paradox, where the unresolvability, because these two things that you point to are not contradictions, they're not opposites.
Can you imagine, I don't know, like taking people, I know it's what you're doing, I really appreciate now as you're articulating it. You're saying reality is thick and messy and chaotic, and it's also simple and
At the same time.
the same time. And that's
Mhm.
and you can't build, you can't do the work and pretend that that's not the case. You can't artificially shut down the complexity of the way reality presents itself.
Yes, but at the same time, when you look at the history of Ilanote, many, many, many makers of these maps believed that there was a mechanical process of the simple becoming complex in a linear way. And
Okay.
I'm not one of those.
It's true, but even in their defense, they would say it's that the complexity is from our perspective only, and the reality is or Ein Sof, and
Yes,
and whatever.
but that's what's in question, the degree to which they believe that. And I think it's not a yes or no, it's a sliding scale. There's degrees of radical acceptance of this.
Okay.
And when I go outside the Jewish world and I look at, for example, a figure that I mentioned, the works of Robert Flood, he did believe that there was a mechanical process of creation where the simple became the complex in an orderly fashion. And I think that a lot of this has to do in the non-Jewish world, post-Renaissance world, a lot of this had to do with struggling with misinterpretations of Neoplatonism. Right. And I think that the people who made it most rigid were not religious people. I think they were humanists. So that's another discussion. But since I'm not a scholar, I can't speak too much to that. So that's the first answer I have to your question. The second answer to your question is I'm imperfect. I don't have stable realization. I'm a practitioner. So what does that mean? That means that I've done this incredible amount of work for 30 years with my practice. So I have these rarefied facilities, but at the same time, I've got a very confused mind. So, of course, the simplicity is going to tie itself into knots. I'm a knot.
I was gonna ask about, just as a kind of thought experiment, if you went, I don't know, in the direction of a kind of Mark Rothko, and you just put out a series of black pictures with nothing on them, and just said, this is, now sit with this, and it is as a way of saying, I'm not going to represent anything that your mind might latch upon and reify. I don't want to possibly contribute to distracting you from, the simplicity of Ein. So I'm just making black canvases.
So why make anything at all at that point? Why not just everybody go home?
Well, right. Well, it worked out pretty well for Mark Rothko, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny because I've never been a fan of Mark Rothko or certainly any of the minimalists in visual art. However, at the same time, I'm a huge fan of minimalism in music. One of them, because of the time elapse of how music works, it works for me. Sonic fields work for me.
Give us
Whereas
example.
In music,
Yeah.
Phil Niblock, Alvin Lucier, Lamont Young, Charlemagne Palestine, certain pieces by John Gibson, Eliane Rodrigue, Sarah Davachi. Who else would I put into this category?
You're gonna end up having to share your Spotify playlist. Oh no, you're a YouTube guy, right?
Oh no, I'm a
Or you're a LP
CD
guy.
and vinyl. Yeah. So
Is Grundig gramophone fan?
the gramophone label? Well, you know, I think that the gramophone label concentrates much more on stuff probably from before the period that I'm talking about, you know.
Absolutely.
And I would say that I certainly love a lot of modernism in musical composition. And I think that their specialty with 20th century would be, you know, modernist composers, you know, like from Stravinsky to, you know, the year 2000. And I certainly love that stuff. I mean, but there's a big difference in sensibility between composers who are inviting you into sonic fields and Bela Bartok, you know. And I think a lot of that is an existential struggle. These are representations of an existential struggle. And for me, it's just a matter of not what gives me traditional pleasure, but what benefits my practice. You know, and to me, music is just a tool for my practice. And the sonic fields are, it's funny, the first thing I ever published was an essay on the subject. It was in a book called Arcana, where various composers and people contributed essays. And I think Terry Riley wrote one in that volume, and a bunch of really interesting figures. So if you ever find that, Arcana Volume 5, the first thing I ever published. Interesting little essay.
I have a question. Did you?
Yeah.
I didn't saw all your work, of course, but did you draw something from Sefer Yetzirah?
Well, I'd say that there is content from Sefer Yetzirah in a loose sense in everything that I've done. But what I do never illustrates something. I've never done a series of illustrations that were single pointed like that because I'm not an illustrator. I don't think I could do it if I wanted to. I don't think I have the ability to take something that is coherent content before the representation and then represent it. I wouldn't know where to start, and I'd get bored. I would just lose interest. It would never be finished. But sure, I mean, passages from Sefer Yetzirah, I could give you evidence of their influence all over like basically in every single piece to some. And when I'm talking about that, I would say predominantly in most versions of Sefer Yetzirah, what would be the first chapter of it is probably more relevant to me than, because the different versions are different lengths, they're organized differently, but generally what I'm interested in mostly in most versions is the first chapter. And to me, I even wonder if that's an older text and the rest was added on. I don't know. You know, it may be the first chapter of Sefer Yetzirah is from late antiquity. I mean, who knows? I mean, you get this argument with the Zohar all the time. Is it 13th century or is it from a, you know, late antiquity tradition. Well, it's not my battle to fight, and I don't have an opinion. You know, I just use the stuff, and I use it in such a weird way that I don't know that much about it. You know, I just know what I do with it. Yes. I mean, my area is so limited that I just do what I do and can't really speak to anything else. But, you know, to get back to that, one of the first questions that you asked me today, I guess that a good part of my work is like being an animal in a zoo. You know, I'm an example of something. Example of what? I'm not really sure, but that example can be viewed.
It does seem from what you've said that the work that you produce, the images that you produce as part of your work, but not really. They are, I mean, this is something we didn't really talk about in the session now, but the extent to which the images even are the work or are part of the work, you know, the relationship between your life when you're not making the images and your life in the moments, in the hours that you are making the images, and the, you know, what aspects of your work take place without pen in hand, and what aspects of your work are actually expressed in the making of the images. And you know, I think it's an interesting thing to talk about also, because I think that's a way in which I suspect your work is different from historical ilanot, although there's still, even there's something to talk about, the extent to which making an historical ilan might have been a practice that wasn't about the information encoded in the image. But
It would have to be, wouldn't it?
I mean, it may be, well, I don't know if it would have to be or if it was for everybody, but certainly it certainly could be, and almost certainly was for some of the makers of ilanot. We spoke about this a little bit last week. Like, there's a lot of things that are just copied, as if somebody copied one of your images. We can't really know what their experience was, if it's a derivative and not something that, but even copying an image could be a practice. So I don't even want to dismiss that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that very often the thing that doesn't get talked about, certainly in an academic context, is the fact that the emphasis might not be the information. It might be a style of working, you know, a mode of being that is played out through a view of reality that is not reducible to a type of theology or a type of ideology of any kind, or any kind of philosophical explanation. It might be something that is much more in line with an oral tradition and a group of people who hold the same view and can't graphically represent it or teach it or speak it. They live it. And for those people at that time, it's sort of implicit.
That's something I've said for years. The very fact that most ilanot were drawn on parchment already suggests that it's not about the information, because parchment in Jewish life for the last 1,000 years means ritual. Does not mean study. If you want to study the Torah, you go pull a printed Bible off the shelf and you study it. You don't open the Ark and take out the Torah scrolls. You take out a Torah scroll for the ritual incantation of the Torah, we might say. An incantation, yeah.
It's a sacred thing.
So it's not, and then it's not about the information. Also, it's like in a way, used to drive me crazy, that no matter what you read, no matter what is being read from a Torah scroll in a ritual setting, the melody stays the same. So you could say, carry out a mass murder against all of the Canaanites. and it's the same as Jacob gave Rachel a kiss. It doesn't make any difference, because really you're connecting to it on a different level. And I think also one more thing comes to mind, and that is, not only did the Academy not know what to make of the Academy for years didn't know what to say about ritual, didn't know what to say about images, which I think, images found in religious settings, because the prejudice in favor of text was so strong that they had no language or even interest in developing a language that would allow them to talk in a meaningful way about images. So yeah, well, anyway.
See, what you're touching upon here is part of that overlapping territory that never gets addressed by people. And this is where I come in. In the Renaissance, when you had those with spiritual and magical interests, esotericists, who were caught in an interesting crossroads. They were looking to Jewish esoterica as a way to open up areas of exploration in their own Christian tradition, and looked at it as a resource that was untapped. In the time of Pico and all of those great figures in the Renaissance era, where they were trying to construct for themselves a Christian Kabbalah, right? Many of them were so radical that they didn't even want it to be Christian. They wanted to look back to late antiquity and construct a Hermetic Kabbalah out of the pieces of Greco-Egyptian fragments that they didn't even understand historically whatsoever. They thought the Corpus Hermeticum was a Bible of some sort, and they thought Hermes was a proto-Christ figure. Okay, so what do you get out of this cauldron of half-understood, half-formed concepts, including Jewish ones, that they had no idea what to do with? Well, you had the loss of exactly the quality that you're talking about. You had the reduction of these things to fragments of information, and what was severed was the artery of the lifeblood of these things that couldn't get across the river. There was no bridge there. So they had to make up a new one, or they had to find something there, or invent something, or whatever they had to do to bring it to life again, to coax it to life again, because that's really the goal. Obviously, everybody knew that that was the goal, to make a living thing. So when you had Western esoterica making use of these Jewish artifacts out of their original context, by definition, it would have to be, you'd have to find them as like a corpse and then reanimate the corpse, right? So centuries later, a guy like me comes in, interested in all of it, and I start out with, Western esoterica. I study with some Jews. I try to put the pieces together, and try to ignorantly put myself in the position of being that bridge, right? Of making something come alive, because my real goal is not to make sense of all this or understand what happened in the past. My goal is just to simply bring something to life through my own practice in a weird, one-of-a-kind way, and make that the stop, make that the thing. You know, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't try to understand the mysteries of humanity that I'll never understand. Just bring some little spark somewhere to life and work on it. And everybody will misunderstand me. Everybody will not get it, but I got to do it. So luckily what happened for me, and this is something I really kind of don't understand. And the funny thing is that when you and I spoke, I was talking about what I call the chamber of exchanges, how my intention brings me up to a certain point, and then I have to check out and invite these impressions in that my psyche will never understand. And there's a certain exchange that happens with the living expanse of mystery where the impressions produce imprints in my psyche, and I can use those to represent things that I don't actually know. And you asked me, does that happen with your pen in your hand while you're drawing? And my answer to you was, I don't know. After we had this conversation, I thought about that a lot. I thought, what does it mean that I don't know? It's a really interesting question. I think there's a point where you have to sign off on the fact that human psychology, the intellect, and the capacity to feel, thinking and feeling, are an insufficient tool for exploration past a certain point. So if thinking and feeling will never account for what's going on, you have to concede that you cannot trust them anymore. They're unreliable tools. You're trying to use the wrong tool. So you got to discover new facilities. And it would be wrong to round it out to just intuition. But we know from the great mystics of the past that living quality that is transferred from one idiomatic language to another, like that gap I was talking about between the Jewish world and Renaissance esoterica, that gap. How do you get across that gap? I truly believe that that requires mystical surrender, mystical immersion, where consciousness, in as whole a form as it can gather itself, has to hand over the operation to that which cannot be understood, and in a bright mode of unknowing, certain things happen that we could never, ever, 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 ever understand with our thinking and feeling. And nothing can be said about that transfer point. So the best that we could do is resign ourselves to this fact and serve it. Serve it with the life that we embody, because we're not going to understand it. So when you say, like, how do you get to the point of the chamber of exchanges? Is your pen in your hand? And I say, I don't know. That's because the tool that I use is not the pen. The tool I use is I don't know. And it better be, because everything else will fail. And I'll tell you from my own experience what happens if you don't do it that way. You're going to start making stuff up. Fantasy will take over. And the human mind has this amazing facility to make up any story that supports its narrative. And that's some dangerous territory right there, because you could inflate so many aspects into distortions. And fantasy is the enemy at that point. If you put yourself in that position, fantasy is, if there is a true evil, it comes from egocentric fantasies projecting themselves spontaneously out of necessity. So that,
fair to say, self-deception.
Self-deception.
Yeah.
But if
fantasy can be understood in different ways.
If you're truly involved in self-deception, you wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so dangerous.
Mhm.
And believe me, the people who prove this point are ceremonial magicians and Western occultists who are summoning angels and spirits and communicating with them, that these people can be dangerous. I mean, I've had encounters with paranormal sort of sand traps of legitimate exploration. You can't just write them off. They're there and they produce dangers. Oddly enough, related to dangers that are supported by religion. I mean, you want to know where this weird stuff, this dangerous behavior comes from in religion. It comes from similar territories where people have allowed themselves to believe things that are wrong turns. And I'm not here to say which is the right one, which is the wrong one, but I could say that as a person who lives this out, there's a whole lot of places where if I make the wrong turn, I could waste my life. And my job really is not to waste my life. So I become aware of these fantasy, like you said, self-deception. Oh, it's so easy. It's so easy to declare yourself the greatest being in all of space in a
What's
moment of
do is, stuff. It turns out that no, doesn't matter.
Hasidim, you know, like that's equally crazy to me too. But
Yeah.
that's what I had to do. That's the price of admission.
Mm.
The price of admission into some of this territory is close contact with insanity.
Yeah.
And I consider myself, I mean, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but I think it's kind of true. If I didn't just accept that I am, from the standpoint of conventional life, mentally ill, I would have a burden to carry where I'm trying to justify that I'm not. So why not just be out of step? Why not allow myself to be a mental defective? It frees me up. So contact with insanity is like, it's part of the deal. It's an insane thing to do to try to live out this paradox that we're talking about. It's not rational. And that's why it's not a form of humanism. Well, it's
Mm.
one reason why it's not a form of humanism.
Mm.
So one thing that gets me very upset, especially amongst academics, is when they try to take, especially the post-Renaissance Western esoteric tradition, and make it kind of like a humanistic proto-science, right? Like a humanities. Like years and years ago, I used to teach at New School University, and I was in the humanities department. Until one day I thought, is what I do humanities? It's like that's how it's being interpreted and presented. I thought something's not right here. It's not just another one of the humanities. This is not just another subject.
Mm.
You know, I mean, they fired me anyway. It's not like I quit because of it. I mean, I've never had a job where I wasn't fired, but I haven't really had many jobs, you know. But I've always been fired from everything.
Like yesterday, I had a meeting with the rector of the university. I like to remind the number crunchers in today's academy that even if they're giving a doctorate to somebody who's studied biology or physics or whatever it is, that they're giving them a doctorate in philosophy. So, you know, we may have forgotten what we're doing in the academy, but in the beginning, and somehow still vestigally in the background today is that it's about loving Sophia,
Well, maybe it should be more ritualized. Maybe you should wear a special hat.
Oh, I have a very nice hat with me today. This group has had some great hats this semester, I have to say. But yeah, we have a hat. I got my nice Gurin Brothers hat with the feather here.
No, I mean like a ritual hat to signify
Oh,
a doctor of philosophy, like they had in the 17th century, I mean, if you received a title like that in the 17th century, you would ritualize it.
yeah, that's true. I mean, we still at the graduation ceremonies, we still get dressed up.
Yeah, so why don't you walk around like that all the time?
There you go. There you
But
go.
but the thing is, like, this is interesting because you're talking to me, and I'm like the one guy who doesn't have a hat. There's no title, there's no hat that I'm given, even in these ritual orders where people dress up like that's all they do sometimes is dress up.
Right.
And I'm not just talking about Western occultists. I mean, the Tibetans do it and really elaborately. And when you hang out with those guys, it's pretty clear very often what the garb does to the mind. I mean, this is what Chogyam Trungpa used to call spiritual materialism.
Yeah.
So we see that in the religious community. They dress up a certain way, they get a long beard, and all of a sudden they're holy.
Yeah.
So you got to be really careful with this, especially if you do it in private, where you could really inflate your fantasy life, where no one's looking.
Wow. We're good, everybody. David, one drawback of academia is that our classes end and other classes begin. So we have to say goodbye to you.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity. I very much enjoyed it. And
I know that it was, I know that it wasn't a simple decision for you to come into an academic setting, and I hope that. Darn it! Yeah, I just don't know why people never stop bothering. I just wanted to say, I hope it was a little bit of a fixing that you saw. You have a class here of people who really have loved engaging your work and studying Ilanot, and now meeting you almost in person. And so I hope there's a little fixing in that we can.
Yeah, well, my
you can
first
see that you
reaction was that I said no. That was the first reaction.
Yeah,
Can you
I
hear me
remember.
okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the first reaction was that I said no, but then I thought about it, and really what changed my mind, what won out, was a living discussion and relationship with you personally. And
Good. I'll take
that's what did it. And through that, because what you've created there, and I have no idea what your classes are like and what it is that you do there, but whatever it is, the questions and the people and the faces that I saw, it worked.
Yeah.
And it came through this living thing with you, a person.
Yeah. Listen, I'm going to put this for the students on Moodle so they can review it. That's our course website. But if you want, since our conversation of last week has interested some of your other students, should we make it available to them as well?
Yeah, sure. Anyone can contact me. People do every day contact me. And sometimes I respond, sometimes I don't.
Okay.
But
I mean,
anyone's welcome to.
The video of this meeting with the
put it
students
up
today, we can put up alongside the last one. As far as
sure. I mean, the only thing that I always wonder is like whether something should be edited a little bit, but I don't think so in this case.
Okay. All right. I think it was a really good question and answer, and
yeah, it was pretty good, and there was very little sort of setup time in the beginning to cut out, so I think it's all right.
I think you're okay. All right, man. So we'll talk soon. Hopefully
Thank
see
you.
each other soon too.
Thank you
And
so much. Stay in touch.
thank you
Yeah.
also
Thank you
so
very much. It was pleasure
Wow.
to meet you.
Thank you. Bye.